7. The Kinsman's Fields. Ruth 2. September the 28th, 1954. Good morning, friends. Last week we began a study of the book of Ruth and saw the tragedy that overwhelmed a small and insignificant family when a drought wiped out small farmers. We heard the widowed Naomi, with her sons both dead, cry out with grief, "Call me Mara, that is bitter, because my life is no longer pleasant but bitter. God has forgotten me," Naomi said, amidst all the perplexing and great social problems of the day. Naomi was inclined to doubt that God was the God of small details and little people, but we saw, as we looked ahead, that God blessed Naomi most of all by her affliction. Although Ruth and Naomi were both insignificant people in highly troubled times, God was working not only in the great events of the day, but in and through His humblest saints. The one true circumstance of faith is God, not environment, death, heredity, race, class, or any such factor is decisive, but only this, the Lord Himself. This Ruth believed, although Naomi doubted. The second chapter of the book of Ruth shows us the foreign daughter-in-law, Ruth, supporting her mother as they settled down in Bethlehem. In ancient Israel, biblical provisions were made for the poor of every community. Some financial assistance was given. Every third year, believers gave a second tithe for the poor. But the major part of the relief was a system known as gleaning. No farmer was permitted to harvest all the wheat, fruit, or produce of his fields. Some had to be left for the poor. The needy then applied to the owner for permission to go in and harvest the remainder. The owner of the field could refuse permission to persons who were undeserving. On the other hand, those granted permission had to work to get the gleanings. Ruth went out to glean, and providentially went to the field of a rich kinsman of her mother-in-law. This kinsman, Boaz, had already been impressed by Ruth's faith and character, and so he instructed his foreman to keep an eye on Ruth, lest she be molested, and also to instruct the harvest hands to leave extra sheaves of wheat in her path, so that Ruth would have enough for her use, and some besides to sell. Ruth's faith and character had not escaped the eyes of man. How could it escape the eyes of God? There is nothing that you and I can see or know that God has not known, yet ordained to the fullest degree. Boaz the man was quick to help. God's help sometimes seems less quick to our blind eyes, but His help is more abiding and is eternal in its implications. We are never forgotten of God, nor are any of our needs too small or too remote to be encompassed by God's knowledge, love, and providence. The book of Ruth tells us that God is the mightiest environment of any human life. We tend to feel that we are surrounded by an environment made up of indifferent, meaningless, or hostile objects, persons, and things. We live in a world which is to us alien, and we feel that our environment is something we have to contend with or work against. But if we recognize that God is the only true environment of human life, then we have reached that same serene faith which characterized Ruth. There was no bitterness in Ruth, only faith. She believed in the Lord, and therefore surrendered her life and its problems into His hands. As a result, she walked free of worry and fretfulness, serene and unafraid. Such faith has its reward. To every Ruth comes the heavenly friend, the divine kinsman, to whom belongs all the pastures and fields and all the good things of life. He comes, and by His providence makes all things work together for good. He comes and often leaves us to continue our gleanings in the fields, but we work under His watchful eye, and we have the assurance of His love and care. This world is our kinsman's field. It belongs to the Lord, and therefore we have the assurance that He will care for His own with goodness and with joy. Our responsibility is to work on in serenity and faith. As Paul wrote to the Philippians in the words of the Phillips translation, "Don't worry over anything whatever. Tell God every detail of your needs in earnest and thankful prayer, and the peace of God, which transcends human understanding, will keep constant guard over your hearts and minds as they rest in Jesus Christ. Philippians 4, 6 and 7.